Hey guys, it's Daniel, licensed therapist. So, Elon Musk is a pretty smart guy. But he's a business tech person. He's all about electric cars, rockets, and apps. But who knew everyone's favorite slash most hated African American was also brilliant when it comes to the emotional battleground? I didn't until I saw this interview with a BBC reporter about his time as the owner of Twitter, and it is so good. Let's get into it.
Close to half the country voted for Trump. I wasn't one of them. I voted for Biden. But nonetheless, free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. And if at the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
I thought this was fascinating because Elon offers up some self-disclosure here. He talks about who he voted for, and this information didn't have to be given, but he just does it anyways. These days, stuff like that can be so polarizing, so he does things so effortlessly and calmly. And that's one thing I noticed about Elon. He's just so calm during this whole thing, and he doesn't get emotional. And I think that's one of the keys to why he is so good in this altercation. His calm demeanor. Let's keep going.
I think the issue some people have is that a lot of people were brought back. I mean, some people were brought back who were previously banned for spreading things like QAnon conspiracies. You have people like Andrew Tate who were brought back, who were previously banned for things like hate speech. Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Well, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
You're literally asking me?
Yes.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information? At the point at which you say that there is this is misinformation, like who is going to decide that?
But you accept that misinformation can be dangerous, that it can cause real-world harms, that it can potentially cause
Yes, the point.
I love it. Elon is so comfortable here, and he's just a guy talking, whereas this reporter clearly has an agenda and is trying to corner Elon. Elon here uses the Socratic method of just asking some simple questions. He asks a very good legitimate question. This question undermines everything this reporter is saying and forces the reporter to explain himself. It's so funny because he asks him, who is the arbiter of truth? And there's this silence and you can feel the fear in the reporter. And finally, at the end of this clip, the reporter deflects and says, will you agree that misinformation is dangerous? Usually when you come across someone who deflects like that and doesn't answer the simple question, it's frustrating. So let's see how Elon deals with that.
What I'm trying to make is that the BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false. Do you agree that that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true.
Correct.
In its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes. Even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
Right,
but I think in the grand scheme of things, the BBC does aspire to be accurate.
You can feel the reporter's face getting hot, and you can see him begrudgingly relent the fact that the BBC has gotten something wrong. And the reporter feels like Elon is on the attack here. However, as a third-party person watching them interact, he wasn't attacking at all. He's just calm and he's actually graciously saying things like the BBC is trying to get things right. It's very interesting because I feel like we see two people engaging in two different things here. Here's Elon Musk just simply talking and trying to figure out the truth, and he's doing it very calmly and politely. On the other hand, here's this reporter going to war trying to nail Elon, and in the reporter's eyes, Elon is attacking back at him, and he can feel himself starting to lose the war. And it gets better.
But you accept there has to be a line in terms of hate speech. I mean, you're not looking at total 100% unrestricted speech.
I generally am of the opinion that if the people of a given country are against a certain type of speech, they should talk to their elected representatives and pass a law to prevent it. So, for example, you cannot advocate murdering someone. That's illegal in the United States, and everywhere really, I suspect. So there are limits to speech.
I mean, I guess taking your argument to a logical conclusion then, do you accept that there's more misinformation on the platform if it's not being policed in the same way?
Here we have another deflection, and he tries to disguise it by saying, if you take it to its logical conclusion, insinuating that this reporter is being logical, but he actually switches from talking about hate speech to misinformation, so he jumps completely from one topic to the other because he knows he lost that battle. Because Elon is right. The thing about this guy is he will not agree or say that Elon is right at all. And we know he won't. And that tells us that he sees Elon as an opposition and that we're in an engagement of winning or losing. At this point, the reporter seems to me like he is a combative and defensive person, and he hasn't really made a fool of himself yet, but don't worry guys, it's coming.
I actually think there's less these days because we've eliminated so many of the bots which were pushing scams and spam. And previous management turned a blind eye to the bots because their bonuses were tied to user growth. And if your compensation is tied to user growth, well, you're not going to look too closely at some of the users. That's part of the problem. So I think we've got less misinformation because we don't have the bot problem that we used to do. And we also have given a lot of attention to community notes, which corrects, with community itself, corrects misinformation. It's been very effective.
I would only just add that we have spoken to people who have been sacked that used to be in content moderation, and we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech.
Man, once again, Elon is just so cool. This guy's trying to corner him again, and he's simply just answering the question and goes on about bots, and it's clearly not what the reporter wanted to hear, but it was the real answer to the question. Once again, the interviewer goes on the attack and throws a jab about people that have been fired at Twitter and insinuates that it was a bad thing because there's not enough people to police the language there. And Elon just shrugs it off. He pays no regard to it at all. And the jabs that this guy is throwing, which might get under the skin of other people, just doesn't affect Elon. And it's actually, to me, really impressive. And now, let's watch this guy look like an idiot.
In the company.
What hate speech are you talking about? I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
but just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
Personally, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm
just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content.
Ooh, it's going south for our reporter here. When you get someone to say, I'm not saying anything, when they're clearly saying something, you know they're on the retreat. And Elon here masterfully uses the Socratic method again. He's just asking these very simple, clarifying questions, and it once again undermines the whole foundation of what this guy is saying, and it's obvious that this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. And that's the beauty of the Socratic method. It really reveals when people are talking out of their butt. And it's just a way that we don't have to get emotionally entangled in arguments. This is something that therapists have to be very aware of. We're in there with clients who have been through the emotional meat grinder and who are super raw. Sometimes they'll try to lure us into an emotional interaction because that's just their pattern in life. We have to be aware of that, and we have to know how to not get caught up in that and bring the client back to what they were processing in the first place. So I'm super impressed with Elon. Let's watch because it gets even better than that.
I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I
you
don't.
can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that For You feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
But you
and
said
actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at
hang on a second.
my
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And
then how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen the For You hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed...
You just lied.
What I claimed was there are many organizations that say that that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not... I mean, right, and
literally
if you look at something
one.
like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I've already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
Oh yeah, I bet this guy wants to move on. And Elon's just having so much fun here. He knows that he has this guy in the rope, so he throws little jabs and calls him a liar and tells him that he has no idea what he's talking about. The thing is, you can tell when Elon says these things, he's not being mean or vindictive about it. And honestly, Elon isn't arguing. He's just asking for an example, and he's just following the logical questions and seeing the gaping holes in this guy's narrative. And the thing about what Elon is doing is that if this guy was able to come up with an example, then it would be totally fine. And it's not like he lost a battle or anything like that. So here we have Elon just having a good time, and this guy's completely humiliated, and it's just awesome to watch. So please, allow your guy here to humbly compare and contrast these participants so that we can understand what's going on and learn what to do and what not to do. The very first thing we need to do is talk about their approach. It's very evident that both of these people took very different approaches to this interview. And I alluded to it earlier, Elon's just a guy that's coming here to talk about Twitter. And since he has that approach, he views this interviewer as either an ally to help him tell a story or as someone who's neutral. I think he understands that this reporter appears to be out to get him, but he sees that and brushes it off and it doesn't really bother him. So he simply sees this as a sit down and a way of getting out some information. Because he has this approach, he doesn't get into that emotional entanglement, which we're all familiar with. So it was an excellent job by him. And we can contrast this with the reporter's approach. It's obvious that the reporter was coming into battle. His whole goal is to get Elon. And when you approach an interaction like that, a lot of weird emotional things start to happen. You can't be wrong and lose the battle. So you start dying on these weird hills that are completely false, and you look like an ass doing it. You can't concede very obvious facts to the other person. Then you look like a moron because you can't acknowledge these very obvious things. And this leads to the second big contrast that I see happening here. Elon is completely unemotional here. He's not offended by anything this reporter is saying, even though the reporter is taking some pretty petty jabs at him. There's a levity to Elon, and we can all see that. And that's completely opposite of what we sense from the reporter. This guy appears so sensitive. He can't define hate speech. It's obvious he lied about the increase of hate speech. And in general, he obviously has no idea what he's talking about, just like what Elon is saying. And there's some pauses in this conversation when you can feel the guy's temperature rising and he's getting hot because he knows he's losing the battle and he's looking really foolish. And he gets so emotional, and that stems from insecurity. He appears to be a weak person in this interview because he can't be wrong. Being wrong would be embarrassing, or it would mean that he's stupid, or it would mean that he's worthless, or something like that. And he goes through all these shenanigans just to avoid that. If he just said, you know, Elon, you may be right, there isn't a rise in hate speech, then no one would be thinking this about him. I get the sneaking suspicion that Elon wouldn't have a problem saying that he was wrong about something. And all of that comes from security. If we are secure in ourselves and who we are, it's okay being wrong. It's not a big deal. And when it comes to our relationships, we wind up in a much more successful place, because can you imagine being married to this BBC reporter and having to go through shenanigans every day in your life? Imagine being married to someone who can never lose or admit that they're wrong. So don't be like this guy. If you are, you know what to do. You have to obtain security through really loving and honoring yourself. And I feel like I say it all the time, but honestly, a lot of it really does boil down to that. So love yourself, friend. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.